And we're live! Hello, everyone!
Exciting!
Hello! We're not getting
Hello.
started with the panel just yet. We'll be doing that in a little bit, but we thought we'd come and hang out with you all. So feel free to say hi in chat. Feel free to, talk about whatever. And we're going to get started in 8 minutes and 39 seconds.
That's so precise.
I know.
Very
Well,
precise.
I'm looking at this little countdown timer going, ooh.
We run a
Oh my
tight
goodness,
ship.
we have people.
Yes, we have
Oh, yeah.
people.
I mean, we'll get some more.
Ah,
It's going to be a fun time.
hello, everyone. Everyone's saying hi in chat. I love this.
Aww.
Lovely,
Hello.
lovely
Gosh,
humans.
I should get on. I should get on the. No, I shouldn't be distracted because I'm going to be talking about serious things for serious people. So I shall leave my phone over there. Although I went there and I got a message from Mum asking me to give her the name of Langston Hughes,
Oh,
who
okay.
is African American left-wing poet dude. I
Oh,
was
lovely.
yes, my mum is getting radicalized. I love it.
Dice Butler.
Well, if there's a time for it, it's certainly now.
Yep.
Yeah, she said white supremacy to me today. I was like,
Hopefully, like, not in a positive way.
No. We were, of course, talking about police.
Right, can I keep chat open and then close that?
Yeah, you can actually pop out chat. You click on the little gear and there's like a
Yeah.
pop out chat option and you can do that.
How exciting. The wonders of technology.
I know, right?
I mean, first I have to find the gear.
Yeah, it's at the like bottom right hand corner.
Gosh, you know your Twitch.
I sure do. I've done tech support. I've done quite a bit. I think that's just the joy of like having your own show and just being in the producer's chair for it, is that you just kind of get really used to like all the little technical things. But that's great because then like I was on a stream on Thursday and like people were like, how do I do web capture? And I was like, I got this, you produce, I got this, I'll teach them, you know. So it works, right?
Yeah, I was on a call with with Mike because I was asking about some Twitch stuff, and it's amazing like how much of OBS is actually quite simple but looks really fancy when you actually use it, like the transition-y things.
Yeah,
like I was always like, oh no, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but
It's one of those things where it's like Control Z does not work and it's counterintuitive and it's a pain in your arse, but it's cool when you make it happen.
do you say arse in Canada?
Well, I know you say arse, so that's why I use arse.
You don't need to conform to us.
I'm British fluent.
Well, the thing is, I noticed because you really pronounced the R. You were like, arse. Also, I should check. Is this like a PG-13 kind of thing that we're doing?
Yeah.
I mean, we try.
Are we watch
In
a
which case,
shed hour? Are we
Mars is
post
allowed.
watch a shed hour?
Are we? No, it's fine. It's fine.
Well, it depends where you are. Here, we're still pre-Watershed because Watershed is 9 o'clock, isn't it?
No, it's like way
Oh,
early.
that's right. You're
What's
a watershed.
What is watershed?
Watershed is like the time of day that you're not allowed to host dubious content.
Yeah. So like, after a certain cut-off time, I think it's a BBC thing. It must be.
Yes.
After a certain cut-off time, then you can start showing the shows that have swear words in them, basically. So
That
that
makes sense. Yep.
it assumes that all the kids are in bed by that point.
Yeah. In
I just
Russia,
like it
there
as,
is
like,
like a
the-
specific show for kids that it's assumed they watch the show and then they go to bed, and then you can.
Mm.
All children watch the show and then sleep.
Yeah.
No, that's like, yeah, because Doctor Who and that's always scheduled at like 7:30, so that like the kids, because it is technically aimed at children, although it has a lot of like nostalgia for lots of adults too, and lots of people watch it. But
Oh,
I
Doctor
was.
Who, I
I
miss
used
you.
to be terrified as a kid when I saw Doctor Who.
I still remember there was one episode with like a load of mannequins in it.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah. I had nightmares about mannequins as a kid. I
My
blame
dad,
Doctor Who.
my dad like started like taking to standing really still to freak me out. That's when I watched that.
fighting with Chatbot. Chatbot doesn't want to cooperate.
Oh,
Oh dear.
terrible. Oh, we have
I can never get my
German
chatbot to work.
viewers.
Yeah. Got people from
German
all over.
viewers.
The
Oh my
episode
gosh.
was it the first episode
Yes.
with the Ninth
Yes,
Doctor, the
it
one with the
was.
mannequins? Yes. Was it a
The
black
one,
just
and
the
remember-
one with the kids in the masks.
was it a black and white episode?
I can't remember. I
Okay.
remember that there was like a warehouse, and like I think the companion went down some stairs and like opened the door, and then there were loads of mannequins. Or it was the other way around, and she was running away from the mannequins and down the
That
stairs.
was probably
was-
Ninth Doctor. They'd like
Yeah.
for some reason loads of that episode takes place in like the back of a H&M or something.
Yes! Oh my god! Yeah.
Because like
Budget
there's
cuts.
there's three Doctor Who sets in like the mid 2000s. Cardiff, just all of Cardiff, Canary Wharf, and the back lot of any shopping centre because it looks suitably like a military base.
I didn't realize they were at Canary Wharf.
Yeah,
No,
for
that
some
makes
reason,
sense.
like they spent loads of like Christopher Eccleston and David Tennant going back to Canary Wharf like again and again and again, and I don't know why.
Well, I guess the thing is, like, I mean, was it always meant to be Canary Wharf in the episode?
Yeah, it wasn't like.
Oh,
it's-
okay.
It's Wanary Corf.
I was just gonna say, like, because the thing is, the architecture around there is really just like placeless. I don't know how else to put it. Like, you could be anywhere. In some
Because like
places around there.
in Detective Pikachu, they filmed it all in London, which is bizarre because I'm not used
What?
to. I'm not used
Really?
to like science fiction films or whatever getting filmed in London. But like it's really noticeable because like what they basically do is they just take like all of the Transfer for London stuff and just pretend it's not Transport for London. So like red buses are like in it, but like they just cover up the signs so that you don't notice that it's like going to Chelmsford.
I was too busy looking at the cutest Bulbasaurs ever to
Bulbasaur's
pay
great.
attention to the buses.
The best part is
I'm
they
sorry, I have
use-
to rewatch it now. I'm leaving.
they use the Canary Wharf station, and there's part of me that feels like the main reason they decided to shoot in London was because it turns out that the if you haven't seen it before, the logo for the London Transport Network is a circle with a line going through, which turns out is very easy to turn
Like
into.
a
Oh my
Pokeball.
god!
So many
yes!
locations are just TFL stations that they like very cheaply edited the sign to look like a Pokeball.
That's
Oh my
amazing.
god.
Genius.
Detective Pikachu was a good time.
So
Very
good.
It didn't.
Aw.
It like shouldn't have been as good as it was. Like it was
Yeah.
bad. I was not expecting it.
Excuse me?
It took me off guard.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot.
I just
As
hope
you can
that
see,
still
we're a
finds
riotous group.
it. Welcome to our Pokemon
and then we're gonna go very serious, and everyone's gonna be like, "What?"
What has happened
We're not
here?
going to stay serious. Like, this is not.
No, we're not going to be.
But we're not going to be
Leverage-
flippant either.
No.
Ooh,
Whole
flippant
scenes in front of
is
the bus
a
maps.
really
Oh,
good
interesting.
word.
Isn't it? I love the word flippant. Don't get to say it very often.
All right, we've got like 27 seconds.
Oh my god.
And chatbot is
At
working,
which
so
point
it's
do
like
I
perfect.
begin?
It's like perfect timing. So like we can do all of the
Excellent. And I
things.
didn't close my captioner
Oh,
again.
Yay!
It's and captioner has said I didn't close my cappuccino again.
Which is also good.
yes.
Don't close your
Do
cappuccino.
not close the cappuccino.
Everyone needs a cappuccino.
My chat keeps going away. Come back.
Oh, come back, chat.
back to
Don't
me,
do
chat.
that.
Come back to me.
Right here. Okay. I'm gonna do that. And then I am going to kind of get us rolling. Hello everyone. Welcome to Sensitivity, Reading, and You, which is our lovely little panel that we've got going on today. Before we begin, and before I let our lovely moderator Polina take it away, we've just got a couple of little preamble things that we got to go through. First of all, I'm going to type boop, pop that into chat. Tabletop Loot. Huge thanks to Tabletop Loot, our amazing dice sponsor, providers of fine dice for all your gaming needs. Head on over to tabletoploot.com and use the code Welcome to the Party Dice, WTTP Dice, to get your 15% off your next purchase. We also have Maddie and his amazing merch shop. And they are the sole provider of Welcome to the Party's merch, so head on over to sonerdwear.com and use the code WELCOME at checkout to get 10% off your next purchase. So Nerdwear, it's what the nerds wear. Welcome to the Party is now proudly sponsored by Roll20, the virtual tabletop that runs straight out of your web browser. Everything you need to play with your friends is ready at the click of a mouse, from click to roll character sheets to build in video and voice chat. You can even upload your own maps and tokens. Get all that and more with a free basic account on roll20.net. Sign up now at roll20.net/start/WTTP. And finally, Welcome to the Party is proudly supported by Devin Rue, who has provided huge support to the community since we launched. For some of the best cartographical content on the web, check out rueinc.com. And of course, join us on Patreon. Our Patreon not only goes to support the channel, but the people who support it too. Your generosity allows us to keep working on our mission to platform amazing LGBTQ and BIPOC players and creators. So check us out at patreon.com/welcomepartyrpg. And as always, join us in our amazing Discord. You can come and hang out with us and chat with us. The link should be in chat or just down below the video, so you can check us out there. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Polina, and we can start with introducing ourselves.
Amazing. As Leona mentioned, this is a sensitivity reading and you panel, and we're going to run for an hour roughly and have a section of Q&As for maybe half an hour afterwards, so please save your questions for the Q&A part so that we can answer them. And my name is Polina. I am your chair moderator for today. You can find me on Twitter at DNDamus. And let our great panelists introduce themselves. Leona, do you want to start us off?
Sure thing. Hi, my name is Leona. You can find me on Twitter at the Leona Maple. I hail from Welcome to the Party RPG. So I'm a moderator here in the Discord, and I am your technical producer for today. I am also a sensitivity reader, and I like to call myself an intersectionality consultant, which means I do cultural consulting, I do sensitivity reads. I help you out with whatever you want to make your work as diverse and inclusive as possible. So whatever you're working on, I can probably give you a hand, or point you to someone who can give you a hand. So that's me.
Amazing. Helen?
Hey, right. So I'm Helen. I'm also a sensitivity reader. This may become a running theme. I also do editing and writing. I work on both tabletop role-playing games and fiction because both genres need editing work. I also work with Salt and Sage, which is a really cool editorial services business over in the US, though I myself are in the UK. And I'm part of the Rusty Quill Gaming podcast, where I voice a 6'6" orc paladin in glowing pink armor called Azu.
Amazing. Finn?
Hello, my name's Finn. I'm a little bit smaller than everyone else who's here today. I'm a fresh face in the community. I also work as a sensitivity reader, though most of my work is consultancy with event spaces and venues in the game industry, talking about trans accessibility and trans positivity in the game industry and how we can improve on that. And I also do some work on the side as a sensitivity reader and as a real certified gamer girl on Twitch.
Incredible. Do you want to start off with a nice more introductory question of what actually is sensitivity reading? Helen, do you want to start on that?
Yes, because I was just realizing earlier that when we were publicizing this, we didn't actually say what sensitivity reading is, but hopefully that means if you want to know what it is, you've come.
Yep.
To me, it's the process of determining whether a piece of work is problematic or offensive in any way to whichever group you're doing sensitivity reading for. So, for example, I do reading for race issues, particularly for Black people and mixed race people. And I also do it for gender and for bisexuality. So usually the kind of stuff I get is, oh, I have a country that is like an African country. Can you make sure that it's depicted okay? That's the kind of thing that I do. I think that is basically just a way to help authors avoid perpetuating harmful stereotypes and ultimately to help change the joys of being live to help change how marginalized people are depicted, because the way that we're represented in media affects how we get treated in real life. That's what I think.
Very fair point. Finn, do you have a similar definition? Do you have a slightly different one?
My take on sensitivity reading as an action is it's quite literal. It takes the title sensitivity reading and basically builds on that. The idea that you're taking a piece of work or an item, it doesn't necessarily even have to be a work, you can apply it to anything, and reading through it and finding items that can be challenging towards you, whether that be because they're directly harmful or because of unintentional content that's appeared throughout the document. I think an important part of sensitive reading is the fact that it's not us literally going through a document, you're going, oh, there's this part here where you accidentally say that white supremacy is a good thing. It's usually far more complicated and much more niche than that. Like, it's finding accidental subtle negative messaging that you've like accidentally put throughout the work, or maybe the subtext of a character that doesn't come off quite the way you intend it to. Like, for me as a trans person, accidents happen a lot, but also trans people in media are essentially, it feels bad to say, but we are essentially like non-existent. There are very few portrayals of trans people in the media, and very few of them are positive, especially in this day and age with a constant negative assault on trans people's lives and their own privacy. It can be difficult to find works that portray trans people in a positive way, and thus the work of sensitive readers is more important than ever, because when you find a writer who does want to do so, because the public image is so negative and unfairly negative, it's very difficult to find a writer who won't just completely by accident like have a completely wrong idea of how it works, because it's not something that's taught in schools like at all. It's only very recent in the UK that they've started teaching what a trans person even is. In other places like the United States, it's not taught at all. So it's all about kind of taking potential accidental or even deliberate mistakes and helping you along the way to fixing and making them better.
Leona.
I don't know how to top that.
Yeah.
For me, sensitivity reading, it's literally the words like sensitivity reading. I'm reading for sensitive things, and they're not things that you're necessarily going to pick up on if you haven't had that lived experience. It's the subtle things, it's the nuance, it's things like that. So I do my best to look out for those things, and I've had a lot of people actually that have been like, what is sensitivity reading? I've never even heard of a sensitivity reader. I didn't even know this was a thing that existed. So I think it's a thing that not a lot of folks know about, and that I certainly didn't know about until December. So I'm very new to this, yeah, I think it's something that everyone needs to know about, and that it can be applied to so many different types of things, whether it's a game or a tabletop RPG or a novel or a board game or whatever it is. And I think it's so applicable to so many different situations, and it's just a good practice to have.
Mm-hmm.
How would a person know at what point they need to hire a sensitivity reader?
Who are you addressing that to?
Sorry. Who would like to answer that? Helen?
Okay. Called out.
I'm so sorry.
Set yourself up.
That's
I'm
okay.
so sorry.
It's because...
I'm so new to this.
No, it's okay. Like, because we're not in the same room, it's hard to tell. That's all.
Yeah. I realized that.
I think that fundamentally, you're usually going to need a sensitivity reader like right at the concept stage of whatever you're working on, because that's often the assumptions that you make in terms of like the themes and the world building that you're doing. Stuff can be really subtle, So I'm trying to think of an example without giving away like what it's about. So take, for example, I do a lot of TTRPG sensitivity readings. Some of them are based on existing IPs. So it might be like something like Cthulhu or something similar. Like there's so much Cthulhu out there that no one's going to know who I'm talking about. But like with something like that, because H.P. Lovecraft is such a massive racist, you've got to be really careful with adapting his work into something new, so that you're not just transplanting what he's trying to say over across. So that's the kind of thing that you need to watch out for. And then once you've sorted out the concept stage and you've moved on to like first draft, you probably need another round again to make sure that the actual words you're writing are okay. Basically, each significant step of the writing process, you will need someone to look over and check it, I think.
Yeah, very fair. What you mentioned that, sorry, let me start that again. You mentioned that you do reading for sensitivity reading for race issues and gender, and been mentioned specifically trans issues and intersectionality. What are the common problems and kind of common issues that you all might run into? And Finn, would you like to start on that?
I'm just having a quick think.
So sorry, would you like me to pick someone else?
No worries. I'm just having a quick think on what I could home in on, because to be honest, there's a lot.
Yeah. While you're having a quick think, I actually wanted to interject and just say, at what point should you hire a sensitivity reader? As soon as you realize you need one. As soon as you realize you need one. So if you're
I was going to say, I wanted to bounce on the question as well.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. So like, if you get to the end of your novel and you're like, oh, I need a sensitivity reader, don't not do it just because you're at the end of your novel. Please bring us on, right? Like I have had folks come to me and they're like, I'm very early in the process. Okay, great. I can help you shape and mold what you're working on, right? So that you
wouldn't say I'm not going to hire an editor because I finished the book.
Yes, right? Yeah. So it's like that. So if you come on early in the process, I can help you shape it. If you come on later in the process and you have something written, great. I can read through that for you and I can kind of help shape it that way. So there's different ways at which we can kind of help. So as soon as if you realize at the end of your project that you need one, that's fine. Bring us on. If you realize at the beginning of your project that you need us, that's fine. Bring us on. Bring us on whenever is my take on it.
As I say, and sorry.
No, you go. I've talked a lot.
As I say, jumping on like that first question, like, and I think both of you have made this point, but I think it needs to be made extra clear. More than once, is the answer to the question at what stage in your project. I think, as Leona said, like sensitive reading is like kind of a new term. Like I only learned about it earlier this year, and Leona said the same. Helen, when did you first, individually yourself, learn sensitive reading as a thing?
The first sensitivity reading I ever did was for the Spire RPG by Rowan Rook and Deckard. That was 2016, I guess.
So this is, in the grand scheme of the world of literature,
it's very new still. Yes, absolutely.
And I think when I explain it to someone, they think, oh, that's not sensitive reading, that's consultancy. And consultancy has such a grander name to it that you think it sounds quite like formal and expensive, I think, is another big thing.
Yeah.
Consultancy, you think agency, you think contact hires, you think big things like publishing. It makes it sound really huge, when actually more than 99% of the time what you're doing is you're hiring a random, like one of us, to have a go over it. So I think don't be intimidated by the idea that you're like hiring on other people to come in. It's just like having an editor in. It's like it's a necessary part of the process. It's only a healthy part of the process. Like we're not going to come in and say it's terrible. That's not our job. I'll only do that to the works of J.K. Rowling, and you aren't J.K.
We're not like we're not auditors. You know, we're not here to catch you out.
So like, yeah, absolutely. At every stage, like at the concept stage, at the writing stage, if you reach a stage in your project where you think, oh, I'm putting in a concept that I don't think I have a good grip with, get it. And I think a really important one that we haven't mentioned is characters. Individual characters you're creating, if they're from a background you're not a part of, absolutely, no matter how good a job you think you're doing, because one of the most common things where I think people go wrong is thinking they're actually doing a really good job when they're not. Even if you think you've done a good job, you should still get someone to look over it, because no one knows better than people who've lived those experiences firsthand. And it's not malicious, but assuming you can as well, if you haven't, of those experiences, at best naive and at worst really harmful.
Yeah.
Should we go to the question you asked again before we went?
Yep. No, sorry. Yeah.
No worries.
So, what are the common themes that you usually address when you're hired for as a sensitivity reader?
So, did you want me to go first? Sorry.
Yeah. Do you want to continue?
Yeah. So the most common themes I get as a trans sensitivity author is obviously gender and how it like plays around. I think gender, because it's such a personal construct that is different for everyone, even cis people, like the way it's expressed individually is very different. Like that fact means that it can often be quite difficult to apply, because the big thing about trans people is there is no one trans experience. And that's the same for all backgrounds. There is no one learned experience. And approaching as a sensitivity thinking I can cover the basis for all trans people just simply isn't true. I'm not a trans man. I'm not someone who's been I'm not an individual who's tackled with dysphoria since a young age. So there are learned experience I don't have. But what that means is, so a valued part of that in the themes I often find is this isn't a lived-in experience I explicitly have. I either need to talk to someone else and get their information and bring it to my employer, or I simply can't handle this and I'm going to need to pass it on to someone else I know. So networking is really big. Knowing other sensory readers is huge. I think one of my favorite things about working in the sensory reading industry is how almost non-competitive it is. Like, it's very big in the industry to absolutely pass jobs on to other people. If you like, there's no like job hoarding. Everyone is willing to pass on to other people.
Yeah, it's certainly a
they
team
can or
game.
should. Like in a way that I don't feel any like other self-employed industry is.
Yeah, I think it's because like each of us can bring such different specific experiences. Like literally all of us have something to offer. Yeah.
Yeah, I've
I
definitely.
will shout out one. Oh, sorry, big pardon.
No, I was just gonna say I've definitely collaborated with folks, and I'm like, I'm really stuck on this. Can I get a second opinion? And you know, I've done that before as well, right? Like, it's very collaborative.
Yeah,
Like-
I've even
Sorry,
messaged
Derek.
like other sensitivity. Like, I found out when I was working on one that there was another sensitivity consultant who had been involved early on, and like something was nagging me. So I was just like, "Hey, did you notice this? And what do you think?" And he was like, "Yeah, we should try and do something about that." You know, it's a very collaborative space. Absolutely.
Like, yeah, absolutely. Like, there's so many different themes in play. Like, the reason I froze when I was asked that question was I was like, oh god, where to start with themes I've seen that I've had to go over. I mean, if we want to do just quick shout outs of like stuff we've seen, non-binary representation is very toxic in especially fictional media, because 90% of the time it's just somebody kind of wanting to have a robot and thinking it'd be cool if they didn't have a gender, because that make them even more robot-y. Like, that's like just an example, but I'm not going to turn this into just me listing off problematic tropes in media, but like that's that's probably one of the most common things I see. Non-binaryism being used to like make a non-human entity more non-human, which the moment I break down that that's what you're doing, you can hear it. The problem is you've just made your character non-human. Like, you're taking away their humanity by making them into a trans person, or at the very least a non-gender conforming individual. And like, even if that's not what you thought you were doing when you did it, like, there's so much to unpack there. Like, with trans issues, like the constant theme is basically it being done by accident, because as I said in the answer to the first question, like, there's so many internalized biases against trans people and gender diversity that you don't even know you have. So you'll think you're really progressive when you're writing this trans person, and then you realize you based it on a ton of stereotypes that don't even exist.
Yeah.
Helen, what are the common themes you address?
So this is an interesting one, which might not be what some people expect, but I read a lot of very different things. I would address two big things, I think, in terms of themes, which is slavery which is when people are just like, yeah, this world has slavery, and just like leave it at that. And I'm
Star
like,
Wars, please stop.
yeah. Now, hang on. There are so many like implications. Like, think about the implications. There's a lot of, whenever I get a piece where there's even like just like indentured servitude, I'm like, you need to think about how this impacts all of your world. You don't just like have slaves and that's it. Like there's you need to think about the economy, think about potential rebellions, you think about how different countries feel about this. Like it's very rare that everyone thinks the same way about something so huge and destructive. That's a big thing that I find. The other big thing which is related is like especially in tabletop games, a lot of it is about, oh, you are from this place and you're going to another place and you're going to steal all their stuff. And I'm like, you've written an imperialist game. This is about colonialism. Did you know that? So I have had to point that out several times, but it's because that's partly because of the nature of Dungeons and Dragons. The whole point of like it's focused around A, combat, and B, loot. Like it's about getting stuff. I'm gonna, oh God, everyone's gonna be like, how dare you say this? But
no, but it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. The D&D is problematic from the ground up.
Yes.
And that's honestly something that every time I consult on something that's D&D related, my first paragraph is always, hey, this is great, but also D&D is problematic as a base thing. Therefore, I can try and help you, but it will never be perfect because we're working with a problematic base product.
Exactly. And like this is without even touching on the races.
Yeah.
Yep.
All
So
races are
that's-
biologically different to one another and thus are predispositioned towards certain labor classes and forms of value. That's not weird at all.
Some of them are good with a capital G and some of them are evil with a capital E. But yeah, so a lot of TTRPGs like use Dungeons and Dragons as a basis. It's like what I was saying about H.P. Lovecraft, although I would never, like, it's obviously not that virulently racist, but it's the same problem of taking a problematic foundation and trying to build on it and expecting that your thing will not also be problematic. It doesn't work like that at all.
Yeah, it just permeates and has knockoff effect on the whole industry.
Yes.
Sorry, Leona,
Yes.
what are the common issues you address?
So definitely the whole D&D is a very problematic creature thing
Yeah.
is something I touch on a lot. I started with tabletop RPG sensitivity reading, so that's kind of my wheelhouse at the moment is looking at games or looking at products for D&D and things like that. I'm South Asian, so of course I am looking at, South Asian characters and making sure that they're done correctly. Indian characters are complicated because India is so diverse and so complicated, and there are multitudes of cultures wrapped up in one country. So, you can, if you start picking, oh, this person was born here, but they speak this language and they do this, and it's like, no. This person is born from here. They have a specific cultural language and way of life that comes specifically from that place. So talking about, like, the nuances of Indian culture is definitely something that I do, and talking about D&D and, just trying to figure out those nuances of tabletop RPG. I also talk a lot about intention. I feel like both in the fact of like, okay, what are you intending to get across, right? Like, what is your intent? But also like, okay, you intended to do this, and it's not quite coming across that way. So I feel like I do a lot of work around intention and also around really being positive to my clients, right? Like, they're all full of great ideas. So I always want to encourage them. And so I try as much as I can, whatever feedback I'm framing, to make it as uplifting and encouraging as possible while still being like, hey, this is not okay, right? So it's I do a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think that's probably like an attitude that all of us try and take, because you don't want to, you don't want to stop the art being made. You just want to help it be better. So like if I was just like, this is all trash, then like that's a piece of creativity that I've just smashed, and I would never ever want to do that. So yes, I think kindness is like a central way that you have to get these things across. So I never say, you will never ever, I think, hear any sensitivity reader say you are being racist here or anything like that. I will say things like, hey, this feeds into this specific stereotype, which comes from here. Here are some links to it, that kind of thing. I just thought of another one that I come across really often that probably people don't think about, which is, I spend quite a lot of time talking about hair, like natural African hair. Like people are like, oh yeah, so this character went and got her hair straightened at the hairdressers, and I'm like, you can't. No, she can't just go in for an hour and come back out again. It's not running it through GHGs. Yes.
Funnily enough, I also end up having to talk about color a lot because I'm sure you've all seen like the most common stereotype of like of people who are aware of social issues is like they have dyed colored hair, which is like not a theme I've had to directly deal with, but it's just a theme I've always had to be just ever presently aware of like the stereotype that like people care a lot about hair in a way that's just very weird, in the sense that like the amount of times I see tweets going like, you have colored hair, I'm not going to listen to you. Like just deciding that means that your opinion can be disregarded. Or because it's that whole like, a common tactic of the far right is to get pictures or is to take like a humorous from their warped perspective image of somebody who's upset over a legitimate issue, and then basically use that and create memes out of it to basically disregard them and mock them and essentially deny them a sense of humanity because they're not allowed to like respond to that. They're not allowed to do anything about it, and they've just basically had their persona, their personage like branded across the internet. And that's a thing I have to be really aware of constantly, like this idea that like at any stage as a trans person you could just get picked up by someone who isn't even going to like warn you that, hey, by the way, I'm going to now just take you and use you to throw you around the internet for like my amusement and for the amusement of others. And that's a common theme I have to work with because it's like this idea of like trans people, because that's debate that goes on heavily at the moment. There's been many discourses about it in the last 6 months, that idea of like trans people who want to be invisible versus trans people who want to be very visible. So that's an entire like theme I have to like go over, where it's kind of like I can't decide the answer to that because that's something that doesn't actually have an answer. Like that's a big part of sensitive reading, is being careful when you give your answers, because there are some themes that just that aren't solved. Like it's not like I can go, oh, you shouldn't, like there's a lot, especially with gender, because it's inherently fluid and there is no binary structure to it. It's very easy to fall into, when answering questions about gender and how it's being presented to, even at me as a non-binary person, I do it, accidentally fall into binarist answers to those questions. Like the amount of times I've had to be like non-binary woman, like non-binary woman is an okay term, but like the way you shouldn't really use it if you're not non-binary, that kind of thing, because it's like you don't really, as a cis author creating this character who has complete agency over that character's existence, perspective and structure, it's not really right for you to like do that. Like binarism is a huge theme I have to deal with, and I imagine it gets seen a lot in your works as well, the idea that like, how do I answer this question without accidentally implying that like it's a solved issue?
How do you, if the question doesn't have a definitive answer, what is your advice usually? Do you kind of push the author in a direction that makes it better while making it clear that it's not a...
It depends on the question, right? Doesn't it, Vin?
In theory, I think the closest I can get to like a generic answer to that would be, this enters the territory of like, when is it not your lane to talk about something? Like I think that's probably the broadest way I could answer that, is that I think, as we said, we don't want to be in the business of stopping up, but me personally, if I found someone who was trying to explore gender in a way that was like above their pay grade, I probably would suggest you are potentially trying to approach an issue from an angle that you can't really, without somebody having to basically hold your hand so heavily that you're not writing it anymore, and that's not fair on you as an artist, and that's not fair on like me as a sensitive reader to essentially have to guide you through the entire process of it. Like, I think there are ways for authors who aren't parts of groups to deconstruct an issue and still talk about it. Terry Pratchett was excellent at talking about race and colonialism, even though he himself was a relatively well-off white man. But then he did that by very deliberately, and even then, he was answering a question that realistically doesn't have a very complicated answer on a ground level. Yes, imperialism is bad.
Yep.
Let's move on. Like, but when it comes to things like more modern, like even more modern things like modern interpretations of gender and where it stands, like to a certain extent, like I think it, like, and is it right for me to say that it's not your lane to talk about it because you have a gender as well and you'll have explored your gender yourself, even if the answer to your gender discovery was I am cis, you still at some point, whether you thought you were or not, exploring your gender in some way or another, whether that be the clothes you wore when you were younger or like phases you had or whatever. Like, it's very difficult to, I think in sensory reading there is a theoretical place where you do say this isn't really your lane and I don't think you can talk about it, and I think I wouldn't know for sure. I don't think I could like on a whim give an example of when that would be.
Yeah. I often find sometimes that it's not so much that they can't talk about it, but they're trying to talk about too many things. Sometimes, like, so I had a really short project a couple of weeks ago where it was just like 500 words or something, and it was just an idea for a character, but they were dealing with having a physical body and also like a soul and being able to separate them, and also there was like magical enslavement involved, and also there was like this whole thing about how it was complicated, but it was only 500 words, and I just had to say, I think the main problem you're having with this is that you can either go like with a magical enslavement thing, which I would not advise for these reasons, or you can explore the thing of something having a physical self and an ethereal self, and but doing the two at the same time is too big of a job. And I think a lot of people who are trying to do something interesting, especially if they're trying to be sensitive around marginalized identities, they will try and cover everything. They'll be like, okay, if I can do this, and this, then everything will be covered and everything will be fine. And it's like, you don't need to do all of that. It's not a requirement. You can write what you want to write, but if you just when you come out the other end, you've got to look back over it and see where there might be things that you don't know, where things are coming from, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I got lost a bit there. What I'm saying is, I think that what I'm saying is sometimes people overcompensate.
Yeah. Where do all of you think that the issues you usually deal with come from? Leona, you mentioned that you talk a lot about intention with your clients. Do you want to start off on that?
In terms of like where
in terms of where the source of the issues might be.
You know what? I think a lot of it is just implicit bias, right? Like, this isn't intentional on the part of anyone, right? People that are genuinely trying their best sometimes, and that are writing in earnest. I've had clients that are really writing in earnest and that are very genuinely trying to do their best. Because they really, really want to, for example, they really want to portray something that appreciates India, for example, and they're trying super, super hard, but unfortunately it just kind of gets lost along the way, and that's okay. It happens, right? So I usually want to be like, okay, well, what's your goal here, right? What are we trying to achieve? And, does this plot line that you've thrown in actually contribute to that or take away from that, right? Things like that. So I do think a lot of it is just completely like unintentional, like where it stems from. It's just kind of, and it's no one's fault, right? We all grew up with implicit biases. I certainly did, and I still work to undo mine. So, we're never going to know exactly 100% of everyone's experiences and what their lives are like. So it's okay to hire a sensitivity reader, especially because Yeah, I don't know what Finn's life is like. I don't know what Helen's life is like.
I don't know what my life is like.
And I'm never gonna know, right? But that's the joy of having a sensitivity meter on your side, is that we're able to kind of help you navigate that and just kind of move past any accidental pitfalls that you might get trapped in.
Yeah, I think a huge part of it is also, I think it was Finn, you said earlier about things are just not taught to people. Like, I was never taught. No, let me get this right. I am 95% sure that I was never taught about slavery in school. But my mother is from West Africa, so and like we have a very, very, she has a very, very English last name. I don't know what our original last name would have been. But I know that it's not actually ours, if that makes sense. But I'm getting off track. The thing is, no one places resources, like automatically places them in your way. No one says, hey, the biography of Malcolm X is really good. Or, hey, there's this new writer whose book has just come out and it's about all of these things. Or, hey, why don't you, I know you don't like rap, but maybe if you listen to this rapper, you might understand some of what their community is going to. Do you know what I mean? So it's all based on you have to proactively go and look for stuff. Even me, I had to proactively go and look for stuff. There's stuff I know now where, like, I am a million miles away from where I was even like a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And it's because I went and found things. And the thing is, people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem.
I think absolutely, yeah. Like, I think where almost all of it stems from is, and to unfortunately quote one of our worst prime ministers, it does stem from education.
Oh my God.
No, we're against imperialism here.
Like as Helen says, when it comes to things like slavery, I was only taught about slavery because I explicitly took A-level history, and even then it wasn't a compulsory module that like the government required schools to teach. It just happened that my school had chosen that to be the module they taught. And even when I was taught it, it was taught from an angle of that it was like an unfortunate mistake that the whole world made, and that like Britain was just there for the ride, as if like they had no choice but to participate in this moment. Like, it was just like, what could we do? Everyone was doing it.
What an unfortunate circumstance.
And at the end of the day, we banned it, so it's fine. Like,
oh yeah. This
that's
whole
like
thing
that's
of
like the length it gets to. Like, if anything, it ends up being like a weirdly triumphant history of like how we banned it.
Yes, it's like, oh yes, but we, the English, stopped the atrocities that we started. And it's like, no. We had to literally kill some of you to get you to realize this.
Like, when it comes to trans issues, I think education is the hugest thing. It's what the big debate in the UK and America and all around the world is right now, is how do we get children access to trans resources in the face of people who accuse it of being, who basically bring back the rhetoric of the 80s, the 90s, like the dark ages of only 20 years ago are coming back in a way, because we're seeing all of these big groups using children as like shields for their bigotry, claiming that, oh, I'm not transphobic, I just want to defend children from all you queers. I meant to say trans people, I didn't mean queers, I just meant trans. I'm only transphobic. Ignore the fact that the KKK is right there funding me, it's fine.
Yeah.
Like,
that's a really, if I could just jump on that point, like, all of this is connected. Like racism and transphobia and like sexism, like they all go together.
Hear me out, folks.
Like,
it's all about this thing called capitalism.
Yes.
The big C.
The big C.
Yes. The society that we live in cannot function without all of these horrible, oppressive ideologies. They prop each other up. And that's why it's not easy to find. Well, the internet has made it easier, but like, that's why it's not like out there. And when, even on the internet, when people say stuff, there's always so much backlash. all the
Yeah.
time. Like John Boyega can't say "I hate racists" without people saying, "How dare you!" Some of my best friends are
How
racist.
dare you? I'm a racist. I mean,
It's all linked, and we cannot address one without addressing all of it.
Sorry, thinking about the society's need for creating the other all the time.
Yes, yeah.
Moving away from an extremely depressive reality, do you have advice for new sensitivity readers who want to help other people and want to get into the industry? Maybe I was especially interested in the mentioning of networking. I was interested whether there is anything you can advise on that, how to find that network of sensitivity readers and get into it.
I mean, you can like follow us. Like,
yes, please
DM
do
us.
that.
follow me on Twitter. May I?
Yes. Finn?
So I think the biggest way to get into it is, to a certain extent, to just do it. I think as an industry, it's still relatively not even necessarily small, actually, because it isn't that small. I think it's relatively fractured. Like, it's not a very centralized industry. Like, there isn't like the big sensitivity reading company that you can obviously send your application to, and from there find other people who like used to work. Like, there isn't as centralized a network for it as an industry than as there are other types of employment, especially self-employment. Self-employment usually has at least one big company that you can go to as like a start off, but like there isn't really one for sensitivity reading. Like self-starting is probably the biggest way to get into it. Like, take your own lived-in experiences, and if you feel like they're not being heard, and chances are they aren't, then bring them to the table, and then like try and bring them to the table. Like, set up your network, whether it just be a simple, okay, I'll make a separate email account and I'll put it on my Twitter, and then if I find anyone who's or anything, I'll like at them and hashtag them into listening to me and paying me to yell at them. Or finding networking groups for industries that you're interested in, going to them and pitching like that. That's what I did. I started going to the London Tabletop Industry Networking event. It's a wonderful little group. I believe its founder is in the chat or watching, or at least was at one point.
Jane was there.
And I went to them and I said, hey, I thought I could lead a talk about trans people. And from there, that was how I found out the sensitivity rating is, because it turned out that's what I was doing the whole time. Like, it turns out that's what I was doing when I approached. That's what you're doing when you're approaching organizations and voicing concern. You just aren't getting paid for it yet. And it turns out you can. Like, so that would be the big way. I'd say go for it. And coupled with that, I think one of the biggest obstacles you'll face is this feeling of like imposter syndrome. I get it a lot, because effectively what you're doing is you're taking something that society tells you isn't valuable because you don't see it in media, you don't see it in works, you don't see it talked about, you don't see it worshipped in the way it should be, and you don't see it like respected. So you think, oh, all I'm doing is I'm just going up to people and saying, this is what I saw. Like, it's more than that. You aren't just like it's very easy to feel like, because you've taken something that feels so normal or feels so nothing and going, now I'm getting paid for it, it can feel very imposter syndrome-y. And it's important to realize it's not. You're not an imposter for being here. You're here because your experiences are valuable and the world needs to know about them, and the world needs to hear about them, and the world needs to, at the very least, try and write a fantasy novel without putting another Native American in a fucking feathered headdress. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, the imposter syndrome is very real, and it's something I actually have a fellow like culture consultant / sensitivity reader that we message each other about our imposter syndrome all the time. That's what we do. It's like, hey, you can appreciate this. That's all we do. It's very, very real. I tend to tell folks, like, I've had folks react to, I did a thread on sensitivity reading and the fact that like we are not a guarantee, which allow me to go on a slight rant for a second. We are not a guarantee for your work.
Yeah.
Just the fact that you've hired a sensitivity reader does not mean that your work is above reproach. It does not mean that your work is not still problematic. We are people, we are trying to help, but like I said, if you're doing something with D&D and it's inherently flawed from the base up, there's only so much we can do. Similarly, just because you hired a sensitivity reader does not mean your work is above reproach. If someone tells you that there's something wrong with it, you should listen to them, right? Even if they're not a sensitivity reader. It's not an excuse. We are not a rubber stamp, right?
Yeah.
And that's just, you know, and I'll let you
So that
both, go for it.
Yeah, I think bouncing on that point, this is just a really quick one. Like, a lot of good organizations will even actually like that do organize for sensitivity readers will have it be as an option that you don't have to appear on the work. You don't have to. You can request your name not to appear in credits. So if you ever find yourself early on working on a piece of work that you feel isn't going to work out, even with your help, you have every right to request you don't appear on it. And turns out one of the biggest threats you can give to somebody who's creating something or is in charge of something is to say, I don't want my name on this, because that sends a clear message. If you don't want your name on something, that means that at the very least you have like signaled to them that you aren't happy with the final like product. More often than not, they'll approach you about that.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't always mean that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying this because I have asked not to have my name on something. And it's not, and sometimes it's just because I felt like they had a good product in the first place and I didn't really do much. And sometimes it's because the thing that's being made is something that I don't want to, like, if I think that it's going to a really large audience, I don't want to get any heat from it, if that makes sense. Like, I have had people like post on their Kickstarter, oh, hey, we've now got a sensitivity reader, and get hate from the people who have backed their Kickstarter because they're like, what do you need a sensitivity reader for? You're going to water down your product now. What, like, this is political correctness gone mad. We should shorten that. What's that? That's
That's a big one. Don't worry about creators like saying things like that to you, because if they were going to say something like that, we're never going to hire you in the first place. So don't be anxious about that. I've literally not had a single person I've worked with even come close to thinking that. Like,
same. Like,
if they were going to say that, they weren't ever going to hire you.
I've never had a bad client, and it's because the kind of people who tend to hire sensitivity readers are people who have good intentions.
Yes.
So I've never had someone say this is preposterous. They've always been like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize. The thing about imposter syndrome, like, I get, like, just to chime in, like, I get that too. I am also in there. Like, sometimes if I read a thing and I'm like, this makes me feel some kind of way, but I'm not sure what it is, should I bother to bring it up if I can't put my finger on it? And I always err on the side of, yes, bring it up and just think about it more until I know what it is, because sometimes it's so subtle that you're just looking at it like it's like a magic eye picture, and you're like, why is this making me feel uncomfortable? What? Oh, it's this, and then you can leave your comment. There is, if something is making you feel uncomfortable and you can't figure out why, it's usually just a little bit deeper. You just got to think about it more.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you're making things up or that you're being oversensitive.
100%. I think another piece of advice to kind of, I was jumping off of a couple of different things, so I'm going to circle back a little. I had a sensitivity reader thread, like I said, that blew up, in which I was saying, you know, that we are not a guarantee, and we're not. And what I had a lot of people that were asking me, well, how do I become a sensitivity reader? Like, what do you need to be qualified for that? Lived experience is the biggest one.
Be alive.
Be alive. Be alive. Have your lived experiences. If you've experienced transphobia or racism, you know, these are awful things, but you can make, it's almost like making lemonade out of lemons kind of a thing, where you can actually take this and make the world a better place because you're able to take what you've experienced and make sure that no one else has to experience that. So part of it is lived experience. So sensitivity reading isn't something that you can necessarily 110% of the time study and just, you know, be qualified for. Having said that, in university, I also did a course on race in the media. I did intersectional feminism courses. I did things like that. So there are things you can do to kind of increase your scope of knowledge if that's something that interests you. So that's kind of how you can kind of get started. I make a lot of noise on Twitter. That works really well for me, as being like, hey, I'm looking for sensitivity readers, like, hit me up, because I want to make a list of people, and that has worked for me. Make noise on social media, other people will respond. You know, and it's not necessarily like bad noise, it's good noise. You're like, hey, I'm looking for folks, other people are going to jump in on that. The other thing,
and like, if you have a sensitive reader that you like and respect, just message them. Like, we're not going to bite. Like, the number one way to create a network is just to message people. There isn't like a secret like Illuminati of sensitivity readers that you need to find out how to get into. Just message sensitivity readers and be like, hey, I'm a bit new and I don't know X, Y, or Z, and like, I'm like, there's a chance we won't know X, Y, or Z either.
Yeah. And yeah, we're always happy to answer questions, 110%. And the other thing that I have learned, and I don't know if this is a thing that Helen or Finn do, but it's something that I have done since I launched my business, and this was a piece of advice that I was given, is to have a letter of agreement, have some sort of contract, so that you and the client both know what it is that you're agreeing to, right? Just so it's clear. But in there, you can absolutely put in clauses like, hey, I reserve the right to remove my name from something if I don't feel comfortable having my name on there. You know, you can put in lines in there like that. You can put in things in there like that, like, you know, I am not a guarantee, right? Especially if you're feeling nervous about these things, it is okay to protect yourself with some sort of agreement. Not everything has to be just agreed upon word of mouth style.
Yeah, Chrono Magistrate just in the chat did mention a point about how one of the big things they're nervous about is like getting flack because like they missed something they didn't see, and like that's why one of the most important things to do in an agreement is include some sort of agreement, whether it's just an informal verbal thing or a formally written signed thing that says like, I am not infallible. I will not find everything. And like, that's okay. Like, I think a lot of people go in and expect it to be like, I'm going to do a deep, thorough, clean investigation with a black light and find every little scrubby, like dirty bit of your story. But like, that's impossible. No one's going to do that. Like, if investigations were that simple, the world would not be in the state that it is in. Like, there is nothing wrong with missing. So to begin with, there's nothing wrong with missing something. Like, that can happen. You're human. No one is expecting you to do that. And I think it's important that you make it clear that they shouldn't expect you to do that. Like, accountability is important in sensitivity reading, both from an author perspective and an audience perspective and a personal, the sensitivity reader perspective. And there is nothing wrong in the contract clause. It's not aggressive. It's not rude. It's not suggesting that you're going to mess it up. Like, they're not going to look at it and think, oh, that means they're not going to find anything, I'm not going to hire them. Like, no. Like, it's you telling them you can. It's essentially, as we're saying, it's you saying, don't treat me like a rubber stamp. I am not going to make your work flawless, and you cannot like come for me when you mess up. If you mess up.
Just from a legal just from a legal standpoint, don't do any kind of business relationship or any work without a contract that outlines that relationship and what is to be expected, and cover your bases, because that is a protection for you. And it doesn't have to be written in legalese. Contracts can be written in a simple, and should be written in a simple language that people can understand. It is not scary to have that agreement that outlines your relationship, and you very much should have it. Just don't do work without that protection.
We are not recognized legal professionals.
I am not a recognized legal professional. Please do not rely on this as advice. If you would like legal advice, find a lawyer.
Yeah, like, I think a lot of the advice for potential sensitivity readers is just advice about setting yourself up as a freelancer, because there's no job advert really. Well, they're beginning to be now, but they're mostly like Twitter posts saying, I need a sensitivity reader, yes. There's no career path into it. So if you want to be a sensitivity reader, you are by default usually going to have to be a freelancer, unless you manage to get a gig with like a big publishing company. You're going to be like their de facto, or you yes, which that'd be great. That'd be great if that happened.
Like, I don't know about either of you, but the only reason this isn't my part-time gig is because I am unemployed.
And also, to be like really specific though, if you are going to be a sensitivity reader, be prepared to give yourself time when you're reading something, because sometimes it's really hard. Because like we've said, most of the people, like, they're not being deliberate, they're not being malicious, but it can still be hurtful to read something that they've left in there, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's a thing that people think still.
So charge extra if they ask for you to do it quickly.
Oh, again, that's a principle of freelancing. If you want a rush job, whack on like 25%.
Just like, just do it.
Yeah. But there have been times when I've been reading something and like, and I've been like, I have to step away from this because this is quite upsetting, actually. So be aware that you should always sort of factor in that time, because it's not just like proofreading, and B, allow yourself to have feelings.
I think that's probably the most wonderful piece of advice that I think any of us has given is, look after yourself.
Yeah.
No matter what you choose to do with your sensitivity reading, look after yourself.
I think also, God, I'm sorry talking so much, but it just occurred to me, reading like theory is actually really helpful.
Yeah.
Critical thought is great.
Yes. And I don't just mean theory as in like all the ridiculous white philosophers I had to read when I was at university.
Read Engels, cowards.
I was so surprised when I first read the Communist Manifesto. I was like, oh, this is going to be really hard. And I was like, no, this makes complete sense.
This is straight fire.
But there are loads and loads.
Do we want to shout out like
the Communist Manifesto?
Shout out to the Communist Manifesto, underappreciated piece of literature. I think just like if we have like a book or like a good like thing to read. I thought that maybe if you, obviously it's a bit on the spot, if you don't have one, that's totally fine. Like I can think of a really good one. I can literally go get it right now. Say someone else answer a different question. I'm gonna go get my go-to.
Go get your book.
If you want a sensitivity reader in the form of a piece of paper.
I've read folks like W.E. Du Bois. I've read Kimberly Crenshaw. I've read Bell Hooks, and there are probably a bunch of other ones that I'm forgetting. But those are some great names to start with. Start with the people, especially if you're trying to do intersectionality based work, start with Black queer scholars. Just start there. That is the birth of this stuff, and you cannot do this work without recognizing and respecting its origins. So start with those folks, because they, oh my God, I can't say enough. Just read it. It's so impactful. And I remember reading it in university for courses and just being like, wow. So highly recommend.
Yes. The work of Black women is absolutely instrumental and often more radical than like, just your random white dude. I think that for me,
Angela Davis.
There are two. Yes. For me, there have been two.
Angela Davis. Sorry.
I think two of the formative books that I've read. The first one was the autobiography of Malcolm X. That was one of the few times where I was reading something and like I was like highlighting stuff like, yeah, this is like I relate to this, even though he was like writing 60 years ago. Oh my gosh, it is 60 years ago. Like in America, and had a completely different experience to me. These are things that I completely feel down inside. And then the other thing was watching this film called Concerning Violence, which is based, it's documentary extracts of the various struggles for independence in African states, interspersed with extracts from Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. So I recommend both those things, both the film Concerning Violence and reading The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. And it's particularly relevant right now because it's about violent resistance and how it's actually necessary.
Finn, do you want to
I
share
found
your
one of
book and then we'll open the floor to the questions?
So my go-to book is, this is going to be backwards on the camera, isn't it?
No, I can see it.
I can see
Oh,
it.
for some reason on my screen it looks backwards.
It does
Yeah, it
reverse
doesn't
in
flip
Twitch for
us,
some
but it
reason.
Okay,
reverses
so
everyone
this
else.
is a graphic novel guide to gender. It takes whilst gender theory is wonderful to read about, if you don't have a sociology degree, it can be impenetrable to read. Foucault's great and all, but he uses enough 6-syllable words that like it's a bit painful. Judith Butler is probably one of the most accessible writers you can get to, and even then she writes from a perspective that at this point is already starting to like date. Like it's one of the most interesting things about gender, the fact that like you shouldn't pick one theory writer and only read them. Like you should read a lot, and obviously like that expects a lot both in terms of financial commitment to books and like time. So it's why I recommend these compendiums. They've written one on gender and one on queer history, and they're specifically written from an intersectional perspective. They specifically call out the fact that there are so few platformed black writers in the field of gender. And they basically take a lot of different writers and compile them together in a sort of like collection of sorts in an easy like presented like visual language. So this is like their one on gender explicitly, but they also have one about the history of the queer movement as a whole and like what it means to be queer.
I think I have
on like
that one.
Granular level. It's fantastic.
I think I have that one.
Like if you want to read folk. Oh yes, of course I should credit people, shouldn't I? This one is Meg John Barker and Jules Scheel. I believe they also wrote the original one, which is a graphic history. I recommend both. They are fantastic like entryway points because there's very little like there's a lot of gender theory, don't get me wrong. The amount of people that say there's nothing written about gender, it's like there's like 700,000 different individual pieces written in the history of man. But it's very difficult to find like a nice well collected like breadth of it, because you can't really pick one person and call it a day, like because like it's so that's my go-to. It's very good.
Amazing. Should we ask the chat whether the chat has questions?
Yes.
Submit your
Great
questions for the panelists to answer.
Please have a question or
I'm pretty sure they will. I'm also
good.
gonna throw out the names that they've mentioned: Transpower by Juno Roche, Angela Davis, Audrey Lorde, of course, Zora Neale Hurston. Those are all such good authors. So definitely. And yes, there will be a VOD for this, and it will also be up on YouTube within a week. Yeah.
Oh, I actually didn't know that. That's great.
Hey.
So it'll be
Permanent.
rewatchable and permanent. So yeah, you can come and watch us anytime.
The thought of
Yeah,
that terrifies me.
T in Treachery has pointed out at the very valuable point that academic works can be found. I won't go into further detail than that, but they can be found.
Look hard, look, and you shall find.
Yeah.
Seek and you shall find.
While waiting for questions, I'd just like to say
Yes.
that like this has been like such a really good conversation to have.
It's been wonderful.
Thank you for like doing all this and setting up. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you, chat, because y'all have been awesome. We've got questions rolling in.
We do.
Ooh.
The first question was, what is the standard rate to charge as a sensitivity writer?
This is the eternal problem.
I like Leona's policy a lot. Not to throw it at you, Leona, but I really like the way you do your pay. I think it's very good.
Oh, thank you.
Ooh, please explain the way you
how
do
do
your
you do
pay.
your
Not to put you on the spot. I was just like, you know what? Out of all of us, I think you have like one of the most like in-depth pay models. That's really good. It's
Well,
very
thank you very much. That's very flattering. First of all, know your worth. Know your worth. What you are. You're charging for your time and your value. You are valuable. I started at $35 an hour Canadian. I've actually taken that up to $50 an hour, and I charge hourly. I don't charge by the word. It just doesn't make sense, especially when I'm reading longer pieces. That just becomes exorbitant, and it just doesn't seem to make sense to me or my clients, and I don't think that works. But I will charge by the hour, and at the moment I'm at $50 an hour. I may take that up even further, because at the end of the day, part of this is a little bit of business talk, right? You have to kind of do math in order to know what's going to cover your costs, right? And so figure out what you need for your monthly budget, and then kind of do some math and figure out your averages and kind of go from there. I haven't done that yet. I just kind of picked a number that feels good in my heart. And that has been an hourly rate at $50 Canadian an hour. And if folks want to tip me, that's always an honor, and I always appreciate it. I leave that in their hands, but that's kind of how I've been doing work, and everyone seems to be cool with that. So yeah.
And I think an important thing that quite a few sensitive users will do is, because like I said earlier, one of the intimidating things about it is that, like, especially as an independent writer, it can be intimidating needing to hire other people. Like, so a lot of writers can barely afford an editor and will often have to just not hire one or do the editing themselves or rely on the charity of like a friend or someone to do it for them. And I think a thing to recognize is like, me personally, I don't think like accessible work should be behind a paywall in a strict sense. If we lived in, I mean, obviously, if we lived in the wonderful moneyless society that should be, then it wouldn't matter. This wouldn't need to be a question. It'd just be, yeah, we do it. But obviously, we need money to live, and our time is worth something because that's how it works, and there's nothing wrong with that inherently. But I think there's no shame in, as a writer, if you feel you generally can't afford it, to approach your censurator and say, hey, I really am like I can't quite make it for your usual your standard rates, but I'm very like, concerned. And obviously they might reply, I'm sorry, but I can't, like, for my own financial reasons or just personal reasons, and that's valid. But like I think you'll find more often than not a censurator will be willing to negotiate if you're not in a financial position to do that, because I think a lot of us do come from the perspective that like the number one way to like help is to recognize that class is present in everything. And like money shouldn't be a gateway to like certain works being more progressive than others, because that only enters into the problematic field of like the only progressive works being like middle classy, like Guardian adjacent like pieces. And
sure
nobody wants to be adjacent to the Guardian.
Yeah, happy to flex my rate. Like, that's just ask, right? Just ask a sensitivity reader. If you're not sure you need us, just ask. If you need us to flex our rate, just ask, right? And a lot of sensitivity readers will be like, hey, okay, for that amount, maybe I can't do all of this, but I can do at least this, right? And we'll work together with you to find something that is mutually beneficial, right? Because we want to help, right?
Yes. I charge hourly, but sometimes for me that's actually not a good deal for me because I'm a really quick reader. So I'm just like, woo. I think I have two things to say on this. The first is definitely do not undervalue yourself, because there's this automatic thing that's like, oh, if I'm cheap, then people want to hire me and I will get more work. But the point of you doing this work is to live, for one thing. And the other thing is that, like, if you charge more, the whole point is that you have to do less work for the same amount of money. Like, that's what you want. You want to be able to, or at least, okay, so I'll speak for myself. I want to be able to balance my work and my life so that I am not stressed out all the time, and my rates. So firstly, they're public. I have them on my website and anyone can go there and look. But if it's not on my website, I'll add it, but I will be flexible if people need it, because I don't want to be like, nope, sorry, bye. So I'm thinking of that GIF where it's like the two guys staring at each other over a table and neither of them is saying anything, and it's like, what are your rates? What is your budget? One of you has to answer, but it can always be negotiated because that's a large part of business.
On the side of being a sensitivity reader and not being sure what to set it at, bare minimum, check your minimum wage and make sure you're not accidentally charging below that.
Yes.
That's a good basis, and the only way is up from there. And then big tip, get a time tracker app.
Yes, I use Toggle.
Yeah, Toggle's very good. That's like the go-to. Like, it's both good for a legal ground from protecting you, so you can prove on some level that you worked the hours you said you did, but it also means that you can make sure you're not undercharging or overcharging or whatever. It's very, like, it's just good for bookkeeping. Like, you don't want to accidentally work too long and then not get paid enough. You don't want to accidentally be like, I'm going to charge 100 grand and then it turns out I only needed to do this, because that's not like the best way to do things, and you can accidentally get yourself in trouble doing that. But like, it's more like you're more likely to undercharge than to overcharge, and never be anxious about overcharging.
Yes, and it's you're never going to know how long a piece is going to take you. Like, there are some times where I've been like, this is fine. Oh wait, and sometimes it's just been lots of little things. But
try not to enter a job being like, pay me for 5 hours.
Yeah.
Like, go for like, I will take at minimum this, and in theory at most this. Like, try to make it very clear from the get-go that like I cannot guarantee how long I will take, but like be willing to negotiate like this idea of like, I will let you know as I go if I think it's going to take a long time, so that you so that you don't surprise them with a larger budget than they were expecting or whatever.
Yes.
And I know that in the tabletop RPG community, if that's kind of where you're starting from, Orion Black at Dungeon Commander on Twitter has a document for people of color, and it's like a unified set of standards. And that document, is great. It's got everything in there. It's got an hourly rate. It's got a word rate. It's got all kinds of stuff. And that was where I started. Actually, was just like, what number do I start at? I have no idea. And Orion's document was where I started, and it was unbelievably helpful. So if you ever want that link, message me, message Orion, whatever, we're glad to give it to you. So that's a good one to check out as well if you're trying to figure out where to set a rate and you're a person of color. There's a benchmark for you. So there's a place to start.
Amazing. The next question in the chat was how to handle requests that are perhaps adjacent to your experience. So the example the viewer gave is, Helen, you mentioned vetting African countries. The person does not have the lived experience of knowing that much about their ancestors' experiences because they grew up in the US, and are wondering how to handle that request, how to figure out if it is your place to do that kind of sensitivity reading, or whether you need to pass it along.
I would personally pass that along. If you are of African descent, but you have never been to the place that you are descended from, or the people like in your family as like the generations are so far that they can't tell you anything about the culture of that place or what it's like, then it's really difficult being part of the African diaspora, because so many of us are so divorced from the continent, or from the Caribbean, or from wherever. First time I've said this, wherever like your mother country is. I'm quite lucky in that I never could figure out if I'm first gen or second gen, but my mum is directly from the Gambia, and I've been there. Like we used to go there every other year, and like most of my family on that side grew up there, and I know. So I've got a whole wealth of experience, and I know how they speak, I know how they look, I know what it's like to be in that country, I know the kind of traditions that there are. But this is also where reading around it can come in as well, because it means that I also have a rough approximation of say, so I've been to Kenya only for a holiday, I was only there for a couple of weeks, but it means that I have at least been there. And I tell you what, it was an experience. It was really great for me because I was seeing loads and loads of Black people in suits and skyscrapers, and like I was like, this is great, this is fantastic. Anyway,
Kenya is great. I had an incredible experience there too. I was in a nightclub and there were people of color all around me, and I've never been more happy in my life. It's
amazing because like I grew up in Lincolnshire, which is very, very white, so it was like transformative. If you've got like a base understanding, you can build on it. If you read from other authors, you can, especially if you're from West Africa, because in terms of the ethnic groups, they have moved around so much. A lot of things are common. So like I can often understand on like a foundational level where someone who is from Nigeria or Ghana is coming from, even though I'm not from those countries, because we have like, there's a common root because of the way that the ethnic groups used to move. There's a reason why we all have this like a version of jollof rice or benachin, which is what we call it in the country that I'm from. And there are just like Twitter wars all the time about who makes it the best. But it's that kind of thing. But yes, to answer the question, I think if you don't know about a thing, then you can't write about it. Unfortunately, you can. You can say I can write about being from the African diaspora, but you can't say yes, I can write about being from Ghana.
I think it's interesting because from like the trans lenses perspective, I think my answer would be different, and I say that as not in approach to your topic, but in approach to my own topic. Like, I think it's very adjacent to that idea of like of what I was talking about earlier, like staying in your lane or whatever. And with trans people, it can be very difficult to say to a creator, don't write about trans people, it's not your place, because what that just means is trans people don't get written about. Because realistically, trans authors aren't very prevalent in the industry, not because they don't exist, but because we aren't platformed and we don't get as many resources and accessibilities into the industry as other creators. So it's very difficult to in good conscience suggest that I could comfortably be like, I can't do that, find somebody else, because I couldn't even I just know for a fact I couldn't guarantee they would. Like, so I enter that difficult period a lot where when I'm doing trans consultancy, where it's like I could not possibly pretend to, in advising venues, because I've advised venues in the past on trans accessibility policy, I could not possibly like claim to know the accessibility rights and needs of every trans experience, because there are so many and they are so varied and they're so beautiful. But like I also can't in doing so suggest they just find somebody else, because they probably won't. And it's a bit sad, to be honest. I don't really know what the answer to it is beyond just that, like, generally what I try to do is, if I'm consulted about a trans experience that I'm not hugely aware of, if it's at a stage where it's like literally the entire encompass of the work I cannot do, then obviously I will pass it on to someone I feel is appropriate, as I do collect like a little network of people I know who could be appropriate. But what I typically try to do is I just try to do my own research, and because at the very least I know I can guarantee that, like, because it's very easy to say, and not incorrect to say to someone when they question you about trans experiences, to just go Google it. But the problem is, if you go and Google a trans experience, you have a 50% chance that the first thing that they'll find is porn, not actual knowledge. Like, there's that statistic that most people's first encounter with a trans person will be through porn, not through a lived interaction. So I at least can guarantee that I will find them that knowledge from a safe and reliable source, where they couldn't, because they wouldn't know how to discern between a safe and reliable source and not. Like, I'd be able to know I've accidentally stumbled on Graham Linehan's Twitter and I know his history, whereas potentially a cis person would.
Yeah, there's so much about knowing where to go to find. Like, if I don't know something, I still know like who to maybe go to. Whereas other people wouldn't. And the other thing is, like, it also depends on how specific people are being. Like, if someone has written something and it's like very general racism overtones, I can do that fine. But if it's about this person from this specific part of the world in this country, in this village, and then I'm like, oh no, I can't, you know.
Yeah.
And I always recommend. I will do what I can, and then I'll say, okay, these are the areas that I cannot speak for.
Yeah, I think the big example for a lane I will not go in is if I'm asked about trans people of color. Like, that's just that is objectively a lane I can't touch, especially because like the queer movement has such a history specifically with trans people of color, that I feel like that is a lane no matter how much research I do, I could comfortably like do or tackle, because the experience in bigotry that like a black trans woman will face compared to a white trans woman is different in a fundamental way that I just couldn't do, and I couldn't hack. Like, I think that's like, I think that would be where my definitive line would be.
Leona, do you have an addition on this question?
Can you just remind me what the question is?
Sorry. Whether the how to know at which point to pass it along, essentially. How to know at which point you don't. Yeah. This is not an experience you can help.
Yeah, absolutely, 110% stay in your own lane. Do not. This is my take on things. I do not advise on things that are not my lane. I do not advise on Indigenous topics. I do not advise on Black topics. I do not advise on things like that. It's not my lane. It's not my lived experience. I'm not the expert in that, and I will not advise on those things. I will refer you to someone who is an expert in those topics. I will do my damnedest to find you someone, but I will not take your money if I am not the right person for the job. And that's just an ethics and a conscience thing. But also I want to make sure that you're getting someone who's going to actually do your work justice, right? So that's my whole thing. Know your lane, stay in it, make sure that your client knows their lane, they're staying in it. Yeah.
Along those lines, there was a question about own voices nobles, and how that if you have a character that is your own voice character, how does that interact with the sensitivity reader when you still hire a sensitivity reader, and how would you balance representing your voice with appreciating that it's not everyone's experience and your experience might be problematic when seen through someone else's lens?
If I take the lead, I have an example.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Unfortunately, it's a bit of a shoddy example. I can't remember the name of the book, but a couple of years ago, this fantasy novel came out that was basically that was like getting really big hype built up towards it. Like it had a Kickstarter that went really well, and when the book ultimately came out, it got basically just destroyed in social media, in the Twitter sphere, in the way that Twitter tends to do that. Because as it turned out, there was content within it that was problematic in the way it talked about, I believe it was gender and race. And as it turns out, what had happened was the novel was absolutely intended to be an author's own experience, and it was them like talking about internalized biases and how those work and how they are self-harmful and how they affect the way you interact with others. And then what happened was the audience took that and decided that meant that the book was explicitly offensive, which is a muddy subject in and of itself, because I don't want to go out and explicitly decide for people that know the book was perfect and like wasn't doing anything wrong, or vice versa. But it is clear that what they were going for was they were trying to write about personal experiences that they themselves were critical of. And I think that plays into this a lot. It's like personal experiences, nobody's perfect, and when we're writing about personal experiences, inevitably I think in that we will talk about negative things that have either occurred in our lives or negative experiences that we have perpetuated in our lives. Like we've all talked about, we all have inner biases that we try to deal with every stage of our lives, that we were raised on, that we still may have even in positions such as ours. Like I have internalized biases that I still try to work through and I'm still trying to deal with, and that's me in this supposedly like vaunted position of a sensitivity writer. Like everybody has internalized biases that they need to deal with and address and acknowledge, and theoretically self-written works are one of the most powerful ways to do that. It's you explicitly as an author exploring your internalized biases and coming hopefully to some sort of conclusion about them in your writing. And I think in that place, like a sensitivity reader's job isn't to tell you not to write about it because it's offensive, but it's to help you write about it in such a way that the audience comes away from it with the right idea. Because I think there is a valuable space for writing to deal with internalized issues and internalized traumas and negative experiences. But there is a level of responsibility to recognize that the moment you publish it, you have an audience, and the way they react to it is also important. And that shouldn't take away from you writing what you want to write, but it's something you should think about when you're writing. And I think that's what a sensitivity writer does to help with. It's like potentially suggesting that you've gone too far in certain portrayals, or that potentially the way you're doing this isn't really a discussion but more of a glorification, things like that. Like, I think this isn't a question that has an explicit answer, but I think the best way is to that, like as Helen said earlier, like we aren't here to trample on your art and like tell you to do it differently or tell you not to make it. We're here to help guide you the way you want like the piece to end up, because obviously you've come in concerned that you're going to do it wrong, and so that means you come in knowing at least on some level where you think you're going to go wrong, so we can talk about that and together we can come to a conclusion how the best way to do that is. Basically the answer is the fact that like it's not just you give us the piece of work, we look at it and then we go, all right, here, we will talk to you about what you're looking for.
The intention.
Yeah, like we don't just kind of take the piece and run off to the wind. We do, like, an important part of like the job for all of us is sitting down with you beforehand and having a heart-to-heart conversation about what is it you're trying to do with your piece of work, what do you want your story to be, and what do you want your audience to take away from it. And knowing that now I can look at your work and tell you where you've succeeded and where you like can put more into it. Like, we're not going to run in and go, you talking about this is a bad idea. We're going to walk in and go, I see what you're trying to say. Here's like,
Let me help you.
yeah,
say
here's a
it.
smoother
Mhm.
way of doing it.
Can
And like
someone-
content warnings. That's
Oh.
what content warnings are for.
Oh yeah. Can someone define to me what you mean by own voices? Because it's a term I see a lot, but I'm not as welded into the fiction universe as I am into role playing. So if
I
someone
accept-
give me a definition.
understanding is.
Okay.
Oh no, sorry. You go ahead.
My interpretation, at least for my answer, was essentially when you write a story where it's not explicitly you in the story, but like, so that it's like autobiographical, but not inherently. Like you're not writing an autobiography, but the
Okay.
story you're writing is explicitly about your own experiences. So good examples are things like, there is arguments that all works are like all art is this because it like all art is like reflection created. She-Ra very explicitly, like a lot of the themes and content in that, its creator has said is her talking about her own lived experiences and portraying them like in her own art. Like I think that's how I'd interpret it.
I had someone actually explain it to me on Twitter in DMs the other day because they were asking me a question about this, and I was like, I'm not even sure what that is. And so what this person wrote was it's basically a hashtag/movement that promotes diverse authors who write stories rooted in or reflective of their experiences, and this covers race, ethnicity, culture, gender identity, neurodivergence, chronic illness, disability, trauma, so on and so forth. It's a way for readers to find books that speak to authentic experiences and diverse authors to identify themselves with readers, the writing community, and those in the writing industry. So that was her definition, which I thought was really well written.
Yeah, that's
Cool.
perfect.
In which case, I would say that if another Black person had written a book in which they talk about their autobiographical experiences that had happened to them, I would never tell them not to write about it. I might say, like Finn said, I might say it doesn't come like it isn't clear that this is a bad thing, or I might say if you're intending to be critical, this doesn't come across. But I would never. I think the first thing that I would do is I would say, why do you want a sensitivity reader on this, and figure out what specific parts of it they want me to look at first. Because the thing is, I was just thinking about this. Like, no two people, regardless of what our similar identities might be, we're not always going to have the same opinions on stuff. So I feel like in that case, maybe it's more of a second opinion than a sensitivity reader that you're looking for.
Yeah, no
makes
community is
sense.
ever a monolith.
Yeah.
I feel like this will be the last question. There was a question in the chat on at which level of popularity of your project you should get a sensitivity reader, in a sense of at what stage do you decide this will be successful. And I have been told that we can go over time, so you can continue asking us questions. At what point do you realize that this project will be big enough that it will affect other people, and therefore I need to get a sensitivity reader? At what point? I suppose it's at what point does it stop becoming something you're writing for yourself and something you're sharing with the people? That's kind of the feeling I'm getting. Helen?
If you're going to publish it, then it's big. You can't predict how big or small something is going to be.
I don't think it's our place to tell you how popular something should be before you could. I think it's entirely your decision in terms of popularity. Like, I know people I've like done sensitivity consulting that's literally as tiny as my D&D campaign I'm having with my friends. I'm going to have a
same.
but like as a white DM, I don't know if this is like a good idea or something, or like as a cis DM, I don't know if this is a good idea. Like, I have had very, very, like, sometimes my consultations have been literally just free of charge, like on the spot, like, hey, I am not trans, but I want to have a trans character. How do I do that? Like, or this is the trans character I'm having. What do you think? Just real quick. If you are writing something and you want someone to help you, go for it. Like, obviously there's financial barriers to that, but like, basically, I think it's less a matter of like there is a certain strict like you are now selling books, you need a sensitivity. I think it fundamentally be if you feel if you feel responsible for the work you are creating, you will know when you need one.
Yeah, like, even if it's just like 5 people read it, you want them to be reading the best version of what you've put out, right? So,
Like, I'm not out here saying you need to get a sensitivity reader right now for your like very personal like fan fiction that you write for a very like that's not what I'm saying at all. But
no.
but my answer would be, if you felt like you should have one, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there is no project too small, there is no project too big. It can be a project you
Yes.
don't ever plan on being released. It could be a personal work that you don't even want to commercially release. If
Mm.
you feel like you want to have a sensitivity reader look at it, like just for your own like for your own like well-being and conscience, sorry, like, yeah, absolutely. Like, I would never dictate a popularity level for when you should get one.
Yeah, and if you're in doubt of like, oh, I don't know if I should bring on a sensitivity reader, because you're not sure if you're gonna publish it, and that's kind of like, if that's like the struggle of like, I'm not necessarily sure if I'm gonna finish this and publish this, it's okay to wait until the end, right? You can bring a sensitivity reader in at the beginning, you can bring us in at the end, right? Do what works for you. So yeah.
Like the glorious ideal, because we did a question on this that was quite similar in the beginning of like, when should you hire one? Like, the glorious ideal is that is at every feasible stage that you can, but obviously that's the glorious ideal, and there's financial barriers, there's time barriers, there's physical barriers. Like, if you can't do that, like, just wherever you can.
Yeah.
Like,
there's no magic formula.
Yeah.
Like,
there'll be some works that won't want a sensitivity writer in the beginning stages, then we'll only want it at the end stage. There's almost definitely going to be some projects that wouldn't want them at the end stage, only at the beginning stage. Like,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it is how you as a writer feel. Like, if you're writing at any stage of your project and you don't feel right, go for it. It's the number one way, both for like making sure it's good and also for helping your own like sense of like something is wrong.
Yeah.
There is a question on whether you've done sensitivity work for non-written media, for example, computer games.
All the time. Basically, I've actually done very little written projects personally. I don't know about you at all. Actually, I know you both do a lot of written projects, but I actually don't know much about your projects. What have you done? Many non-physicals.
I've done some stuff on art.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
Like, usually it goes along with the written stuff, but sometimes someone's been like, okay, this is this character and here's what they look like. And sometimes I've been like, maybe change this or that, but it's not a huge part of what I've done. It's usually just been part, because I do a lot of work for games. Usually the games, like tabletop games, they usually come with the artwork, so it's just bundled in.
Yeah.
Leona?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Finn.
Because I've done, in fact, most of my work's been for events and charities. So the way I started sensitivity reading was I joined a charity called No More Damsels. They're a wonderful group. Go look them up. They promote gender inclusivity in gaming spaces, both physical and digital. And basically, when I first joined, I approached them to suggest that some of their language around that gender inclusivity was very binary in its language, and basically suggested that like certain people aren't welcome. And I basically, the moment I spoke to them, they were super warm, they were super welcome. They were like, oh, absolutely, could you come in for like, and then they like brought me in to like have a proper sit down meeting. But before I knew it, I was doing like basically an actual consultation with them. And that was basically where I started. Like since then I did more work for them. I've done very informal work for like businesses I've worked for. Whether I was listened to was another story, but like I tried. I've worked in a lot of like game stores, and I've tried while there to like encourage like better language and better like policy. I think venues is a big barrier in sensitivity reading, because I think well, not even necessarily venues explicitly, like abnormal inverted commas like forms of media I think are the biggest barrier to sensory reading, because I think a lot of people don't think they need it. Like you hear sensory reading, you think it's like just for books or something, but like realistically, like any project that has words that are being communicated to an audience can use them, and events especially should have sensitivity readers, and if anything are even more responsible for trying to make sure that that happens. And they already have it. Like sensitivity reading basically in its most primal form are event organizers. Like the are like safety consultants for events are probably like the most primal form of sensitivity reader. Like they're brought onto events to analyze their policy, their like structure top down, to make sure that they're like safe for everyone and explicit people, and in many cases explicit people. Like you will get people whose explicit purpose is to go as like, you know, I mean, there's an entire industry of like disability accessibility for event spaces and how to organize that. Like so a lot of my work, I'd say, actually has been like non-conventional in terms of the media I've analyzed. I've done games, I've done spaces, like, and if you are in charge of like a venue space or a non-explicitly written product, you definitely should still be considering everything we talked about today.
Mm-hmm.
Leona?
Yeah, I've definitely done art. I had someone who was like, am I doing the right thing? And I, sat down and chatted with them. I even in tabletop games, I tend to look at the art, especially when the game itself is neutral. If they're looking for explicit diversity and inclusivity, art is a great opportunity to do that. So I've looked at art. I've helped with community policy. I've helped with a board game. I can't talk much about that, but I've done that. I feel like I've consulted on all kinds of things, right? Like sometimes it's just like, hey, I'm putting together a show or a stream, or or I have this idea and I don't know how to make it, diverse and inclusive. And so there really, like, it's so hard sometimes to be like, this is what I do, because really this applies to just about anything. So yeah, ask us, we'll help.
Yeah. Like, no matter what your project is, if you think like it's appropriate, it probably is.
Yeah.
Like, I literally could not think of a product where it wouldn't be an appropriate thing to do. I mean, like, I think an example of where industries regularly will go wrong is like, I mean, look at the amount of times that like clothes industries have to take down adverts because they accidentally put black kids in like monkey costumes and stuff and didn't think about it. Like,
or makeup brands. Do you remember that time where they had like all the different hands and they just colored one person's hand black to pretend that they had a black hand?
The makeup
model.
Industry is a travesty.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And they got found out because I think they colored the palm black as well. And I was like, you've never seen a black person.
Now I'm sitting here like, see, if you had a sensitivity reader, you could have done blackface respectfully. You would have colored the hand properly.
No, we would have said, go get a black person, you idiots.
Yeah.
But,
Yes, to be serious, yes.
Yes, to be proper.
Do hire a sensitivity reader if
Don't
you're a
hire me.
makeup company.
Applies to everything.
Yes. Another question from the chat was on bad characters, as in antagonists, for example, or explicitly
villains.
bad. Thank you, villains. I was like, what's the word? That word. Foe? No, villains and problematic behavior, but also having villains have characteristics of marginalized people, and how do you deal with that? Is it okay to have a villain who does have a marginalized characteristic? Do you want to start, Helen?
I mean, the short answer is yes. Like,
yeah.
The long answer is yes, as long as there are other characters with that characteristic who are, good or neutral or whatever. Like you should never be in a situation where all the bad guys have a certain trait in common. It just, I mean, I feel like I shouldn't have to explain why. You don't want it to be like, yes, the bad gay black men. I think it's absolutely fine as long as also as long as it's not like, they're bad because they have this trait.
Yeah. I think just think about like the most common like popular villains. There's a reason almost every like major villain that people remembers are like part of some sort of minority, whether that be there's the whole trope of that the villain is bisexual and is always bisexual, and like disability. Like, think about how many disabled characters have you seen, and how often have they just been villains because they've just slapped a scar on their eye or something to make them look scary. Like, I think that happens a lot. People will slap a scar on a villain, not thinking about the fact that what they have done is they have made that character a disabled character in doing that, and thus have played into the long like trope of disability as a terrifying villainous thing. But there is, I think, a slightly more wholesome reason, not scars withstanding, why we so often see villains being the ones who have minority characteristics. And that's because and why they're so related to, and it's because like ultimately in mainstream society, being a member of a minority is considered explicitly deviant in some way, and so a white creator will regularly make them a villain. And so what happens is we get these characters that are beloved because they're these wonderful villains, because we relate to them by accident in a way that the creator didn't intend to. So like for like Disney have so many villains that fall into this, like
Yep.
like the main villain of The Little Mermaid is really popular because she's a demonstration of an unashamed form of femininity that is rarely portrayed. But they had to slap it on a villain, not on the hero. Like, and there's so many other examples. Like regularly villains are more interesting because they're the ones that are allowed to be deviant from the norm. And what that unfortunately ends up turning into is that they are the way they're deviant is the way that the white straight man who wrote them thinks is deviant, which is basically just not being like them.
Yeah, they're often just more interesting. I mean, there's a reason why I'm like obsessed. Like, so I'm a huge horror fan, and I love like monsters and demons and that kind of thing because I'm like, I don't know. This is really off topic and really in depth thing to talk about. But like, there's something. I think we want to know what makes someone do awful things.
Yeah, it's that's such a modern convention now, isn't it? Like writers have realized, we can't just like have villains anymore. Like we do need to explain them. Like Batman has always like been like the villains are working class people who've been alienated by society and have found no other avenue to express their rage, but then fails to pay off in it because they don't have it mean anything at the end of the film. That like writers have their cake and eat it by having villains who are relatable because they have like a relatable reason for doing it, but then by the end of the film they've been defeated, but the status quo that they are rightfully challenging hasn't been questioned or solved in any way.
That makes me think of the Vulture in
the Vulture's great for that.
Like it was Tony Stark's the villain.
Like I love my hot sexy war criminal. He's such a great character. I hate Iron Man. He's my least favorite character. Fucking kill me. I hate him so much. Why do I love him?
I didn't know the stance.
He's a war criminal. All right, that's my platform.
But I mean,
we've lost Leona. I'm sorry, everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I was gonna say that
murder me on the regular.
It is an American character.
Yeah, shock and awe. Actually, Polina thinks absolutely right. It's no surprise that the military war profiteer is a hero in the eyes of American society.
And
if Iron Man was a villain, they'd have to recognize that George Bush is too.
And yet, I really love Steve Rogers, and I think it's because he turns on the government and he's like, "No, you're still Nazis. Bye."
Like, bye, I'm out. I'm a head out. Anyway, the panel we're doing.
Yeah, sorry, another question.
No, that was my fault. That was entirely my fault. I don't know why you're apologizing.
On the topic of villains, there is a question on specifically Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender, who we all love dearly. The question is that how to approach things that change over a plot arc, in the sense that Zuko originally was a villain, portrayed as a villain, and gradually gets a redemption arc. And how could, considering that he does have a scar and origin in the beginning that could be seen as a sign for villainy, how do you deal with that?
I think not to be, I don't want this to come off as mean because I don't mean it to at all, but I think that's potentially just a very simplistic way to look at your character. Like, to look at Zuko and see him with a disability and think immediately that that's like negative is not, it's an absolutely valid defensive mark to make. I mean, every time I see a queer character in a piece of media, I go on the defense for the entire thing. Like, okay, how are they going to mess this up? Like, I don't expect them to do me right. But like I think this is a problem that happens a lot especially now that media is consumed in a much faster way thanks to websites like Twitter's, where people kind of forget that like shows aren't finished yet. And so it's perfectly valid to point out, I hope they don't like go off the deep end with this Zuko character and accidentally like do a bad. But I think it would be wrong to outright say that is what the show is doing. Like Steven Universe got this a lot. People criticized the show that hadn't finished yet for plot arcs being like morally dubious because they were plot arcs that hadn't finished yet. And as it turned out, like years later when those plot arcs finally finished because the networks let them finish airing their show, turns out, yeah, they weren't planning on ending the arc like that. And they actually did a really good job and wrapped it up neatly. Like, I think it's absolutely valid to be wary whenever your character is praised something, because as a trans person, I basically always have to be on guard when I'm put in a piece of media, because there's a 50-50 shot that I'll be surprised by them being killed halfway through it for no reason. But like, I personally like to go in with at least a hope that like they're going the right way about it. But then I come from a very privileged position of like.
Could you repeat the question for me, please, just
Yes.
quickly?
How to deal with a characteristic being assigned to a character originally portrayed as a villain, but that changes over the plot arc? Is that something you need to be
Okay.
cautious of?
I don't think so, but it depends on the arc. I think if your intention is to start with someone as an antagonist and end up with them being, you know, one of the good guys, you shouldn't take away whatever that characteristic is. Like if Zuko became good and then his scar faded away magically, I'd be like,
Well, yeah, because this
Not
is
like
a thing
that.
that happens in the show.
Makeover.
They explicitly have a scene where when he's at the crux of changing sides, he is offered the opportunity to get rid of his scar, and ultimately he chooses not to.
yeah.
And like by the end of the show, like he's embraced that like it's not a negative thing about him. Like he's proud of it.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. I don't want to get too far into it because I feel like it's very specific, the example, and we shouldn't do it like that. But like I feel like Zuko's an interesting one because I think he personally, and obviously it's not my lane necessarily, I think he's an example of it done pretty well.
I think-
I also read. No, sorry. Go ahead, Helen.
I was just going to say that I think the important part about doing a redemption arc is that it's earned.
Yeah, kind of.
But also Zuko was planned for a redemption plot, and I feel like certain other people were not. But we will not get into Star Wars here.
I mean, I'm
We've already
not going.
done Marvel. Let's do Star Wars.
I mean, I want to be clear when I said that was like a joke, but also like I do think he is actually a very good example of like that idea of like the redemption arc gone very wrong. Like they've just kind of like they kind of threw it at him, ignoring the fact that at several points he commits a violent assault against both, like he literally commits genocide at one stage of the film. Like he murders countless people. Like he's straight up a fascist. Like there's a place for a redemption arc, but it's usually the kind of redemption arc that you're not allowed to survive. And the fact that instead a woman dies in his arms, he gets his kiss, he gets his true love, and then he gets to not die and go off and live his life without.
He does die.
What?
Does he?
I thought.
Wait,
I
did
don't
I
know.
get it
I
wrong?
didn't
kind
watch
of
the
read
I
last
got it
one.
the wrong
He's
around
the
and I
one who
forgot
died.
that Ray doesn't die. I for some reason forgot that Ray lives, and that's the point. But no,
I was like, oh no, there's been a different cut of the movie.
oh god, so it's worse then because he gets to like die. He gets to like not face
Without
the
living with the
heroically.
consequences.
because he gets to die on the positive note of like how he saved the universe. So he gets to
Yeah.
die without consequences. It's even worse.
Yeah, I was fully prepared for him to become the big bad of the third film, and for it to. I will never forgive them for Finn. Like,
Yes.
Because I
you know,
I did this.
he was meant to be a Jedi. I will die on this hill.
The strongest character in all of Star Wars is John Boyega himself, because I love how the moment the film was done, he was just straight on Twitter like, yeah, Disney's racist, come at me.
Yes.
The Peckham lad.
Oh, I love John Boyega. Another question, away from Star Wars, back to sensitivity reading.
Yes.
Do the
Star Wars is
same.
racist. Don't at me.
Yes, so true. If marginalized writers or artists want to depict majority experiences or cultures that are not their own, do the same sensitivity reading requirements apply to them when they're writing a majority culture?
Like if a
Apologies.
black person is writing a white character.
Yeah, apologies not to sound dismissive, but hire a
Yeah.
white sensitivity writer.
I mean, partly that, but also in order to survive, we often have to know the nuances of the majority outlook on things.
I think
There's
at
no
that point-
such thing as reverse racism, though. Like,
Yeah.
I think, but that's what I mean. I think explicitly, like, there is a place for like recognizing, oh, like, I somehow have literally no idea of the white lived experience, even though I've watched any Hollywood film. But like, at that, and so there is a validity to like, if you were in that position, hiring someone or like getting someone to just help you out with doing it proper. But like, I wouldn't call it sensitivity reading because I don't think explicitly it's for the same purpose. Like at that point, because like at the end of the day, if you mess that up, like it's like the whole reverse racism thing. Reverse racism doesn't exist. Like obviously, like, because I don't think it's very likely you're going to accidentally write a story that completely devalues and dehumanizes the white race and removes them from their platform of power in society. I don't.
yeah, that's not an accident.
I don't think that's possible.
Mhm.
Like,
Usually, if you write that, it's going to be a very pointed thing.
I think my answer to this question is to read Noughts and Crosses.
Do you know what? I haven't read that.
I don't know what that is.
It's Mallory Blackman. She
Mallory
basically
Blackman.
writes, "What if apartheid was to white people instead?" And it's very well done because it very explicitly, basically, is just a call out to reverse racism as nonsense.
Yeah,
so
Mallory
interesting.
Blackman is a famous
She's
Black
a
British female author, and Noughts and Crosses was everywhere when I was a teenager. But I never read it because I was kind of like, this cannot teach me anything.
Oh yeah, it's very like a book written by black people for white people. Like it's
Mm.
very explicitly like, yeah, like it's very adjacent to like the only way to get white people to learn about racism is to go, what if you had to deal with it? What if we made this about you somehow?
I'm gonna turn the question a little bit in that if you're saying like majority experiences, as in like I am, let's say for example, I'm South Asian and I'm writing about a different area of Asia, definitely hire a sensitivity reader, right? Like if that's the kind of majority you're talking about, then definitely hire a sensitivity reader because it's not, you don't know that lived experience, right? You can try, but so if it's like a majority in that sense where it's like the majority is just from a culture that's different than your own, then yeah. But if it's like white culture, what they said.
I mean, also we enter the territory of like the philosophical discussion of does white culture even exist? It doesn't. Like, like, yeah,
Bless.
like it's very difficult to approach the idea of like what is majority culture because realistically, like, it kind of doesn't. Like I said that like mockingly, but it kind of like philosophically does it exist? Like, does majority culture exist in a way that's like, I need to learn about it explicitly? Because theoretically, that's just like mainstream society, and it gets problematic to start asserting that mainstream society is white culture.
Yeah.
Oh,
What white supremacy exists, and it's what we all live in. And that's why we can write about it, because we're in it. We're steeped in it from the
Yeah.
ground up. Like
In fact, actually, on the topic of white supremacy, I think that'd probably be the one example where I would say actually going for a person for a position of power and getting sensory would be a good idea, because there is a validity in, because you get people whose sole thing is like, I used to be in the KKK, talk to me about what it was like to be in the KKK. So you can write stuff in an accurate way. Like you get people who do things like that. Like that is in its own way a form of sensitivity reading, kind of like it's the same kind of thing. But again, I don't know if I'd call it sensitivity reading.
topics like de-radicalization are
Consultancy?
absolutely yes, they're absolutely fascinating for that reason, because there are lots. In fact, I'm not going to complete the sentence because it's too complex. There are so many reasons why someone both goes into that movement and then comes out of it. So I think if I was going to write about that, I would actually go to someone. I have a book by someone who used to be a neo-Nazi, actually. and chatted about, and he's just really lonely in it.
Yeah, like
He's
I
just
think
talking
that's
about how sad he was.
like I think that's where I would say a sensitivity reader is necessary, where if you're explicitly writing about a very specific, like, non-minority experience, because at that stage you do kind of have a responsibility to report on it accurately, because you can potentially cause harm by reporting. Like one of the major ways like white fascism gets away with it is they basically portray themselves as ultimately harmless and not that important, and you're taking them too seriously, and they're just silly like goobers who like role play as Nazis. And like quite often stories will write them like that. Like it's fun to like watch like Rick from Rick and Morty kick the shit out of a Nazi, but it's like, but at the end of the day, like if that happened in real life, the Nazi would have been able to sue him for millions of dollars and get that millions of dollars. Like like, and I think that's where like getting a sensitivity reader would be important, like talking to an ex-KKK member to break it down so you can accurately portray them, so you don't accidentally, like, the risk isn't that you would accidentally like portray them as too powerful. The risk is that you'd accidentally portray them as like not that big a deal, or like, I mean, like there's a place
you don't want to whitewash them, is what you're saying.
you don't want to whitewash them. Like the term whitewash has multiple applications beyond just like the literal like correct term for it. There is also the term for it for taking like muddy subjects and cleaning them up and make in a way that ultimately is detrimental. Yeah.
It's just there's so many levels of it though.
I feel like it seems to come back to I feel like it seems to be a fact that you might think that there is an issue of a specific type, but actually what you are concerned with and why you want to get a sensitivity reader is a different issue that you didn't necessarily realize, and you need to get to the crux of it first in order to know what the right question is to ask. And then you can ask those questions to the sensitivity readers that you will hire.
There have definitely been people who have come to me saying, can you read it for this? And I've come back saying, actually, there's also this.
I think that we have answered the questions we have been asked.
Ah, fantastic.
I think there is one last question I spot in there actually that I don't think we jumped on, that I would like to jump on, because I think it's a beautiful last question. Let me just find it.
I've not been watching chat this whole time. I have been blissfully unaware.
Yeah.
Oh God, where is it?
There were some good ones.
Here we go. Ilartemi asks, if we wanted to hire a sensitivity reader, what is a good way? Where is a good place to go find/meet one?
Yes. Well, do you want to answer? Or
no.
No.
Yeah, but yeah, that's the question. If anyone wants to jump on it first, because I think that's a nice closed question.
I say Twitter.
Leona?
Yeah, I say Twitter. Twitter's a great place because you can shout out and be like, hey, I'm looking for this person. Or you can reach out to whichever sensitivity reader you know, and just be like, hey, I'm looking for someone who can do this. I'm happy to help with referrals, right?
Yeah, and worst case scenario, one of us will point you to someone better if you don't already have a follower of that stripe.
Yeah,
there's also there's agencies, like Salt and Sage Books is a good example. Who specifically deliberately collect and organize on behalf of sensitivity readers projects for them, and basically act as a big hey, come to us and we will find them for you.
They've got a big I'm one of them to disclose that information, but I do freelance work for Salt and Sage, and they've got a big bank of sensitivity readers for so many things. I should probably disclose I'm technically also in that bank, I think. So yeah, but that's disclosure.
They've referred people to me, so that's my disclosure. I'm not yet a part of the team. I've applied,
yes, they are a good example. As much as I said agencies don't exist in a centralized way, there are groups who try to.
I think they're one of the first ones.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They are landmark for it, doing it.
Yeah.
In other spaces, it would be just even if you're not working on something, if you think you could be at some point and you see out in the wild sense, you really write their contact references down and just hold on to them for later. If you're writing something and need a sensitivity writer for one issue, and on your journey to finding them, you find out about other ones, write those ones down too, for all you know, in the same project or in another project, you'll end up needing them in the future, and then you can just contact them and be done. or message that sensitivity writer you've already worked with. They'll almost definitely someone. I don't think I know a single sensitivity writer who does not know any other sensitivity writers at all.
Aren't you putting a list together, Leona?
I am. It's not on my website just yet, but I did kind of yell on the internet. I was like, "Let me find some sensitivity readers," and so I'm trying to put a little list that'll go on like my little website, just so that there's some people on there to make it a little easier for you to find folks. But even if like you don't want to be on the website, like I will just like keep your information to myself and only reveal it if someone asks me for like a specific person of that.
Yes, I will shout that out while I'm here, that I am putting together my little black book of trans people, where basically, if any of you are listening right now, hello, you're wonderful. Please find me on Twitter and just send me a DM about what kind of work you do, whether it's art, whether it's a project, or if you write. I'm just collecting a little black book so that on my travels, if like I work, so like I want more trans people involved in the project directly beyond straight up just like, helping me with my editing. Like, for example, if they wanted a trans artist explicitly, so I can have people to reference, so I'm not just like, so I don't have to very embarrassingly say no. So like, if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please hit me up on Twitter.
Amazing. Thank you for the recommendations. Do we have any last few words for the viewers, besides the thank you for coming, and you've been a wonderful audience?
Try and donate to the various protests that are going on in America, please. Yeah, I'm very scared.
There's some explicit ones to look out for. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but you should be able to find it very easily. There's Minnesota relief funds, because there are a few people piggy banking off of it, and it's unaccountable where they're sending their money. But there are some charities that are being very careful and deliberate in making sure that they're like, there are go-to charities. Make sure you don't donate to the first person.
North Star Health is one.
Yeah.
The George Floyd GoFundMe is there. There's also the one for Breonna Taylor as well. There's one for
there's a bail fund for anyone who gets arrested.
Yes. There's a I'm going to end up just listing all the black people who have died. So go
the Minnesota,
and have a Google.
I believe it's the Minnesota Freedom Fund. I would do some research beforehand to be certain. But essentially, there's quite a few charities right now where the work they're doing is taking money to pay for people's bails who were arrested during the protest, because one of the leading causes of long-term internment is an inability to pay bail. I've
retweeted some lists of them, so if you
go
scroll
to
back on my Twitter, I've just been retweeting everything.
Whoever goes on my Twitch channel right now, it has my Twitter feed, and it's very bizarre to look at, because it's like 50% like the police station deserved it, and then it's like I'm just gonna stream New Vegas in an hour. Any more things to shout out? Do you have your own things to shout out?
Ooh, yes. Let's go around and shout out where we can find each other on the internet, because that's important.
Okay.
I can start, since I was the one that was like, do it. So my name is my name is Leona. You can find me on Twitter at Leona Maple. I will paste once more in the chat where you can find all of us. So yeah, please hit me up on Twitter. I have a little link tree in my bio there that'll lead you to my website and my coffee and my Patreon and all that kind of stuff. But that's the main place where you can find me. And I'm an intersectionality consultant and a sensitivity reader. So please hit me up. I'm happy to help. Happy to answer questions. Yeah. Just come say hi.
Amazing. Finn?
Hello. As you probably have learnt by now, I am Finn. You can find me on Twitter at FinnTheBin, spelled FINNTHEBINN. And through there, you can find a link to my Twitch channel, which is currently my primary source of not income, but like some money. I'm streaming New Vegas. It's a fun old time. Come hang out with fellow trans gamer girls. It's a very fun time. In terms of social movements progress, in terms of the United Kingdom, currently our Women and Equalities Minister, Liz Truss, is pushing for reformations to the Gender Recognition Act, which is the legal act through which trans people can attempt to get their gender legally recognized. She is attempting to reform them along transphobic lines from the recommendations of bigots and slanderers. If you are in the UK, no matter what constituency you're in, whether it's whether it's a Tory one, a Labour one, a Lib Dem one, if there are any left, please write to your MP about this. It's important because it's pretty much that it's pretty clear that the government's basically trying to do it while no one's paying attention, and trans people can't go outside and protest because of the lockdown. So please write to your MP. Please look for local organization groups. It's easy to feel like we're powerless right now because we can't go outside, but the important thing to recognize is that you are not. And at worst, the moment lockdown ends, like, there will be hell to pay.
Yeah. Yes, I am Helen. You can find me on Twitter at Alecto101. That's ALECTO 101. I also have a Patreon, which is where I dump all of my I write specifically for the Patreon. Like, I spent hours a couple of days ago doing
they've been paying me for like 6 months. I should probably send them stuff.
I write a poem every week, and I write a piece of flash fiction every month. So that's just some stuff if you want to see like my original writing. I would also ask you to donate to Belly Mujinga's I think it's a GoFundMe, but there's a fundraising thing for her. She was a Black TfL worker, that's Transport for London. She got spat at and caught COVID-19 and died. And they're saying that the two things were not related, and they think we're stupid. So go look her up and see if you can help her family with the funeral expenses. If you go to any protests, whether now or once we're out of lockdown, cover your face, write down the phone number of a lawyer, and do not trust the police.
And stay hydrated.
Stay hydrated, take food. Might be a while.
Mm-hmm.
Stay hydrated
Look
with the
after
tears
yourselves.
of the police.
Take your meds.
I forgot to say, if you want to hire me for consultancy work, if you go to my Twitter, I have a email that you can email me at with specific queries. And I will be, as of next month, making an appearance on the What's the Trans podcast, talking about tabletop RPGs. I can't give an exact release date yet, as I'm not aware of it, and I believe they aren't either. But if you keep an eye on them, I'll appear on it.
Great.
Congrats. Yeah. My DMs are open on Twitter, so.
Yeah.
As are mine. As are all of ours.
Yes.
And that
Amazing.
doesn't have to just be questions about this. It could be questions about anything that we talked about today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But
Amazing.
not questions about how to cook eggs. I don't know how to do that.
I do. I am Polina. I am not a sensitivity reader, but I have been the chair tonight. And thank you very much, Finn, for inviting me. This has been the first time. This was very exciting, and I'm so pleased to be in this company. This has been amazing and really helpful and useful and really interesting. You can find me on Twitter at DNDamas. It's DNDUMBASS. I'm not a sensitivity reader. I don't really have much to offer. I'm sorry. But if you are a Londoner or in a London area, or while the quarantine continues, anywhere in the world, you can join the London Tabletop Industry Networking if you're interested in board games or tabletop RPGs and getting into the industry and meeting other like-minded people and get helpful advice, because we have experiences that we can share, and it's an event that happens last Friday of every month and is some kind of a webinar at the moment, ranging from how to start your company to how to run a Kickstarter, or just or Finn was also on it, explaining to us how to include trans characters in your content and why you should.
I forgot one last shout out. Put your pronouns in your bios, you animals.
Yes, do that.
Do put pronouns in bios, yes.
Yes, you can find London Tabletop Industry Networking on Twitter at London_10.
Fab.
Take us to the outro, Leona.
Okay. First of all, thank you to our patrons. Those that are in the host with the most tier for making the channel possible. We didn't have a break snapchatting yet at the end. That is Donald G, Nerdy T, Michelle E, Abigator, Anino, and Andy T. Thank you so much for being our lovely, lovely patrons. Thank you to everyone who followed, subbed, hosted, rated, or were just awesome in the chat. Chat, you were absolutely rocking. As always, remember our Discord, our Patreon, and our merch. So lots of love to our sponsors. Let's see what else is on this list. And we are going to raid on our way out. We are going to raid Goldheart Gaming, and they are a D&D group run by women of color. So I think that that's a perfect group to raid. So team, why don't we wave goodbye now? Bye.
Bye.
Oh, it's counting down. It's counting down. We're almost there. We're almost there. So
Oh my
soon.
god, so many
Keep
people.
waiting. Bye, everyone. Thank you,
Thank you.
audience. You're being
Bye.
amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Raid, do the raid thing. Do the raid thing. And
I have been
transition.
popped into a different place.
What does that mean?